All right, so we got a big video here. I'm going to try to go through this quick because we got 5 nerfs and 10 buffs to talk about, all hitting soon, like today, right now, depending on when you're watching this. All these are hitting today, so some major changes coming to the Hearthstone meta. For instance, Refreshing Spring Water going to 5 mana from 4. So slowing down some of the crazy Spell Mage turns where it feels like they draw through their entire deck and just keep spending mana and playing cards, because this one is refreshing and basically always free in Spell Mage. Sometimes it even gains you mana because you've already discounted Spring Water with Incanter's Flow. So turning down that absurdity a little bit, slowing it down some by pushing it to 5 mana, I think that's a good change. It'll make Spell Mage a little less frustrating to play against, and of course also reduce their power level just a little, which, you know, it's not the most powerful deck necessarily right now, but still creates some pretty bad experiences. And also I think is a deck that could get stronger in the future as they get access to more and more spells as the card pool increases. So nipping this problem in the bud now might also reduce any issues that crop up as we get awesome new spells in the future as well. And then we also have a change to First Day at School. First Day of School, I've been talking about this one for a while. It's going to 1 mana, but that's not the only change. Carefully note here that it's also going to give you 3 random 1-cost minions instead of only 2. So you got to pay a little mana to do it now, but you're getting more stuff out of it. And of course, more stuff's cool because you get better choices in some cases. Like you just, you know, you're getting an extra minion, so you get another roll at an awesome thing that you can play, sooner and save that bad one for, a couple turns down the road, basically, which is cool. But of course, you're not able to play the minion on turn 1 unless you have the coin. And that's a big hit to Paladin because they have a lot of great turn 2 follow-ups with things like Hand of a Doll. So having that turn 1 minion more consistently, thanks to First Day of School and sometimes really good turn 1 minions, created some power plays. And now they'll have to play that minion on turn 2, which might break the curve naturally with cards like Hand of a Doll to follow it up. Now, that said, though, you are creating a fitting turn 2 play after you play First Day of School on turn 1. You're going to have, guaranteed 2 minions to fill in your turn 2. And then you'll still have a third one to kind of flex into future turns as well, which was one of the reasons First Day of School was good. You just got all these 1-drops. You basically filled in any gaps in your curve throughout the early game. I think this new version will help you do that, but it also breaks some of the crazy strong stuff that you could do. So this is notably weaker. I think it will still get played in a handful of Paladin decks. I don't think this totally kills the card because that increased flexibility, increased mana fit in some cases is still going to feel powerful, but you won't get wrecked by the turn 1 into turn 2 plays quite as often now. This is a little bit lower tempo, a little bit higher value, which does slow Paladin down. Now, that said, I don't know if this is really enough to totally nerf Paladin. They're still going to be a pretty strong looking deck, I think. I'd have to take a closer look at numbers to be sure, but Secret Paladin and Aggro Paladins are still at the top of the meta pretty firmly. So is this change going to be enough to pull them down to parity with other classes, or will the buffs be enough to push other classes up? That I don't know for sure. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on whether this was enough for Paladin. Now, that said, this is not technically a Paladin nerf, but might be what makes it, good enough to keep Paladin in check, because Crab Rider, a card being played rather successfully at high-level Paladin decks, is also getting nerfed. Also important to decks like Rush Warrior, a handful of others. And basically, the Wind Fury is only going to be for a single turn. So Crab Rider remains a great way to react to some early game tempo from your opponent. Basically, take a couple trades, keep their board in check, but it does not remain a crazy high damage output threat on board afterwards because it loses Wind Fury. So it's not going to get buffed with whatever Rush buff or Hand of a Doll buff in Paladin or Conviction buff in Paladin and just whack your opponent for, 10 damage or whatever it is, which that does reduce the aggro potential for this card a little bit. And it makes it more of a sort of reactive or almost control card, which is what Ixar had referenced it as in the past. And we were all like, wait, what? That's not a control card. but it sounds like they had envisioned it that way. It was being used in other ways. Now they're shaping the card to actually fit that mold that they had envisioned for it as being more of a reactive or control card. Now, does this mean Crab Rider is dead? Does it stop getting played? I think maybe in Paladin it does. I think it's really important that Wind Fury presents the threat. I don't know if it's good enough just to react to your opponent's stuff. Rush Warrior might still be able to make enough use case out of this just because they have so many other Rush synergies generating copies of this and stuff. Still going to be an interesting card. But it's a lot worse. So I wouldn't be shocked if people cut this from their list, at the very least overreact at the beginning. Maybe it makes its way back in later. But it's a significantly worse card because its face pressure threat is notably reduced. I think it's average at best now instead of like crazy strong. So another hit to aggro decks here. Mancrick getting a bit of a change. The Consumed by Hatred version of Mancrick that gets summoned when you find the wife is going from a 3/10 to a 3/7. Which, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think this is a huge change. Like, very occasionally that's going to help people kill this a hair sooner, right? But it's still a really big minion that you're getting for free. It's still hitting face, so you know, it's still getting that damage outs that you want out of it. I don't think this really changes the Mancrick's play rate much at all. It just, you know, reduces the win rate just the tiniest little fraction of a percent here and there, which that's fine. Mancrick's a good card, but I don't think he's totally OP or anything. Just very commonly played. So yeah, I don't think this is much of a change at all. Just, yeah, that's fine. Makes it slightly more easy to trade into this thing and deal with it, which will change the outcome of a game every 1 in 500 times or something, probably. And then the final nerf here is Hysteria. I wondered if this was a possibility just because it seems like such an insane card. And sure enough, Hysteria is getting nerfed a second time. Remember, this already got nerfed. It could target any minion, so people were using that crazy Wretched Tiller OTK, but that was also just really good sometimes with like your own lifesteal minions. Now it's also going to 4 mana. So pretty big hit here to Hysteria and Warlock and Priest. The thing is, I still think it's insane at 4 mana. I think it's still going to be a really good card. You know, it's just occasionally going to be a little bit more punishing to squeeze it into a turn. It'll be harder to play other stuff with it. You know, comes a turn later if your opponent does something super crazy in the early game. So all in all, a definite hit to the card, getting, you know, a third more expensive, basically increasing by 1 from the original 3. That's a big punish to Hysteria's power level, but I think it'll still be good. And you know, it's kind of weird because Priest and Warlock aren't exactly the top of the meta right now. Priest is good at higher levels of play, you know, top legend basically, but not a card that you would say is like dominating the meta. So kind of intriguing that this one got nerfed, but I guess its individual power level just stands out so much that regardless of the kind of archetypes or decks around it, it was still noteworthy enough for Blizzard to take the nerf bat at it and push it to 4. And you know what? I honestly don't disagree. It's a really, really strong card and sometimes feels very frustrating to have it played against you. So that wraps it up for all the nerfs. Now we've got buffs and man, some shockers here. Nazoth going to 9 mana. I didn't even dream this was a possibility. Frankly, from like a flavor standpoint, it's a little weird because all the other old gods are 10. Every other of the, you know, 8 total old gods that are printed, even Mecha'thun's 10 mana. It's a little weird that he's 9, but hey, I'll take it, whatever. I like Nazoth. I play a ton of Nazoth decks. Now, materially, will this make a huge difference to Nazoth's play rate? I mean, he comes down a turn sooner, so that's significant. But even if you play him at 10 mana, I mean, there are some like 1 mana plays you don't hate squeezing in alongside Nazoth, you know, just like something to help you stabilize a little more, like a Brain Freeze or a Renew. Or one cool thing we've been doing is playing this in Demon Hunter. You can hero power with Nazoth now at 10 mana, which means you can attack your opponent's face with an Illidari Inquisitor on board, summoned off Nazoth, and hit them for an extra 8 damage, which you couldn't do when Nazoth was 10 unless you had a weapon equipped, which sometimes was hard to line up. So I don't think this makes a huge difference to Nazoth's viability, but maybe there's like one deck that can now afford to run Nazoth because they're able to do other things. Maybe it's that Demon Hunter. Who knows? Kind of a weird change. I don't know if I totally love it, but I guess I'm okay with it. I like playing Nazoth, so if he's a little bit better, that's probably good news for me. And then this change, Deck of Chaos going to 5 mana. That's fun. I love the Deck of Chaos decks, but they're terrible always because playing Deck of Chaos for 6 mana is just ridiculously punishing. So hard to do anything else, just sacrificing so much tempo. At 5 mana, it's still going to be a really expensive card to play. I don't think this like suddenly pushes Deck of Chaos decks to the top of the Hearthstone meta. I don't think this is a Luna's Pocket Galaxy scenario where that got buffed and kind of broke the game. I think it's probably still more of a meme card. It's just a meme card that's a little bit easier to play and a little easier to have fun with. So we're definitely going to try it out and have some fun. But I wouldn't expect this to rocket itself to the top of the meta. Next up is Dark Inquisitor Xanash, which getting an interesting change here. This is the one people had asked for. It also been teased by Blizzard already. Essentially, it's as simple as it's now going to affect corrupted cards. Something that's already been corrupted also gets discounted, which is cool for cards like Horrendous Growth. If it was in hand, you already corrupted it a few times. This will make it 0 mana, make it easier to corrupt in the future. So good change. Again, I don't know if this pushes like a corrupt priest to success. It's noteworthy, but it's not like really, crazy strong or anything. So I'm sure this also remains a like just fun card that's slightly better, not, a meta relevant piece. So here we have Lilypad Lurker going from 4/5 to 5/6 on its stats, which is crazy to think about. Imagine seeing this card like 3 years ago or something. A 5 mana 5/6 with a hex on its battle cry. Like that's just completely busted thinking, 4 or 5 years ago. That said, Lilypad Lurker as a 4/5 hasn't seen any play because Elemental Shaman hasn't made any sense. So, I talked about elemental cards that might get buffed. I didn't think this would be the one that gets there, but man, as a 5 mana 5/6, this just seems so bonkers to me. I don't know if it's enough to carry Elemental Shaman like in this expansion, but moving forward, if we get just a few more pieces that can make an Elemental Shaman come together, it feels like Lilypad Lurker could be the star of that deck. It's just an enormous mid-game swing card, silencing or removing your opponent's crazy mid-game threats while still developing a significant body of its own. I'm really looking forward to Elemental Shaman getting there, and I think this card could be a big part of that. All right, next up here for Tidal Surge, going to 3 mana from 4. This pulls it a little closer in line to like the Penances and Drain Souls of the world, which this felt like it was definitely outclassed, being twice as expensive for only 1 extra damage. But here at 3 mana, I think this is a reasonable card. If you get a control shaman that comes along, this feels like it'll be a great way to keep up against some minions, and 4 is a good break point, and a little bit of healing never hurts. So absolutely a spell-based, nature-based, control-based shaman, all of those I think could use this Tidal Surge at 3. At 4, it did not feel great. At 3, I think it'll actually feel like a pretty solid option. And then here, another elemental buff, the Unbound Elemental. OG card here going to a 3/4 stat line from a 2/4 stat line. So slight attack buff here. Basically going to give it those spider tank stats at a baseline. That said, I still don't really think this is enough for Unbound Elemental, man. Overload synergy stuff and overload cards are so hard to get to work consistently. There's been like one era and one card maybe ever, Tunnel Trog, that really paid off overload super well. Maybe there's a few I'm forgetting, but it's just so hard. Overload's a really punishing mechanic. I don't think this is like a good enough minion with enough upside. Still a little slow at only a +1/+1 buff. There's no rush. There's no taunt. No other side effect. It's just stats. And I don't think one attack changes Unbound Elemental's power level significantly enough to suddenly get it over the hump when it's been a card that's been more or less unplayed for years and years and years. So I appreciate the gesture. I'm glad Elementals are getting a little love, but I don't think this fits in well with the other elemental stuff we have. I don't think this is good enough for Overload to make sense. So it seems like unless something changes drastically, Unbound Elemental here as the 3/4, still not really all that exciting. Moving on to the Whirling Combatant here, also getting a meager attack buff here, moving to a 3/6 minion. We've seen a few, 4 drops at that stat line, the old Water Ellie stat line. Now, I'll say, I thought Whirling Combatant was going to be a pretty solid card with all these different whirlwind effects and stuff, but Warrior just hasn't gone in this direction. I don't think this being a 3/6 makes it significantly different enough on board that it's worth it based on how we understand Frenzy to work right now and Warrior to work right now. This, again, just doesn't seem to change the card that much. When it's randomly summoned off stuff, you find it, whatever, arena, whatever, it's, going to be marginally better, but this is not a significant enough change, I don't think, to make this card suddenly meta relevant. I think much like our previous card, it still falls a little bit short despite my shock and dismay. Next up here, Shieldmaiden going to 5 mana from 6. And, you know, that does feel substantially better. 6 mana always felt like it was a little too expensive for Shieldmaiden. It also just didn't feel symmetrical. Everything else was being at a 5 on this card. It always felt weird that she was 6 mana. So I'm thrilled from a feel standpoint that she's moved to 5. That's so much cleaner, so much more symmetrical across all the numbers. I don't know that she's still a great card. You know, she's probably fine if you're running some really greedy armor or control warrior. You know, we actually had some fun with this in duels recently, even at 6 mana. So, like, yeah, maybe there's some worlds there where Shieldmaiden is competitive, but for normal standard constructed Hearthstone, I think there's just way too many more powerful things happening. Even a 5 mana Shieldmaiden is probably not quite good enough. I'd rather just have a great rush minion that's going to save me more health in many cases than gaining 5 armor wood. So, you know, when she's randomly generated, etc., like our other cards, sure, that's great. That's nice upside. As far as making the cut in a deck list, I still doubt it. And then here we got the Razorboard. I think this is our last card. It's going from a 2/2 to a 3/2. Now, this card is actually being played a little bit already in Hearthstone in Death Rattle Demon Hunter, which is a deck that nobody really seems to talk about or notice or care about, but it's actually a solid deck. It's a tier 2 deck right now, even over the last few days. Not at high levels of play. It's more like tier 3, but at lower levels of play, a pretty solid deck. I've used it to climb numerous times in the last month, really successfully. I always play Demon Hunter off stream because I got to grind out those wins and stuff. Razorboard doesn't feel like the best card by any means in the list, but it does tend to stick around on board a lot in the early game where your opponent's kind of scared to kill it because they don't know what's going to pop out or what sort of death rattle chain they're going to generate. So it often gets a few face attacks, or, you know, just 1 to 2 extra face attacks maybe, which, you know, if you've got an extra health, maybe isn't that bad. Demon Hunter cares a lot about face damage compared to like Whirling Combatant, where maybe face damage isn't as relevant or that minion's less likely to connect. This one is so punishing to kill. When they leave it behind, they get more punished by the attacks where it goes face. If that scares them too much, they're more likely to kill this, and you've got this death rattle upside. So the interaction here on the attack and the significance of the, you know, the attack gain per mana cost, when this is a much cheaper minion, one attack goes a lot farther than on a higher cost minion. I kind of think it makes Razorboard a more interesting card, and it's already an okay card. So this is intriguing. This could make Death Rattle Demon Hunter notably better, I think, because a few extra points of damage in the early game can really add up and make the breakpoint differences late in the game when you're looking for those final few points of damage to kill your opponent. So don't sleep on Razorboard or Death Rattle Demon Hunter. Oh, I lied. There's one more card, but it's because everybody forgets this card exists. Fiendish Circle's going to 3 mana. Yeah, I mean, this card's a Witchwood card. I looked it up. It's in the core set now, of course, but it came from Witchwood, which I totally forgot that was a thing too. You know, 3 1/1s or 3 mana is not bad, but it's not even like muster for battle, right? It's like not even as good as cards that were printed like years ago. So I still don't know if it's good enough. I mean, there are some angles here, right? Like there's spell stuff, there's like imp stuff maybe that comes along. There's even like Ritual of Doom, where, you know, having a wide board could be helpful. That said, I still don't believe Fiendish Circle's quite good enough to make sense. But maybe this is one of those things where they're buffing it, looking ahead, like they know like the mini set or like the next expansion is going to have some card that really interacts nicely with Fiendish Circle. So just setting it up, like that's the only reason I could see why you'd go and adjust this card in hopes for the future. As it stands in current Hearthstone and what we see for Warlock today, Fiendish Circle still readily ignored and readily forgotten. That wraps it up here for all the different buffs and nerfs. And of course, I'm really curious what you guys think. Is Nazar at 9 mana just a little too weird? Maybe? Is Hysteria out of nowhere? Is Mancrick going to make a difference? Is Crab Rider still playable? Is First Day of School still playable? Is Refreshing Spring Water still playable? Hint, yes, it's still going to be good. But is this what you were looking for out of the nerfs? Are you excited, disappointed? Is this going to make you love Hearthstone or just make you hate it even more? And which buffed cards do you think have a chance to really impact the meta? I want to hear all those thoughts and more in the comments down below. But until then, thanks much for watching. And until next time, game on.
Yeah.